And then we highlight what we call or refer to as modern echoes of Lysenkoism. So, we don't have mass starvation, we don't have a gulag or death camps or anything like that. But this is what we do have. We in this chapter, we go through a couple of cases really that are emblematic of much more serious problems of scholars being punished for wrongthink, for pissing people off, basically. Bruce Gilley published a paper arguing that in many places, colonialism actually improved the quality of life for most of the locals. This paper was mobbed, denounced. I mean, tens of thousands of people were calling for it to be retracted.
It's fear equity now. Everyone is afraid, left, right, center, we're all afraid of being canceled, or at least having our grants canceled. Now that sounds terrible, right? I don't want to live in a country where everybody's afraid, or academia where everybody's afraid, but the fact that everybody is afraid now means that everyone has incentives to re-embrace the First Amendment, to re-embrace free speech, to re-embrace the scientific method, to re-embrace the things that for me as a blue-collar kid 40 years back made academia a really fun place to be. Everybody has incentives for change now, and that to me means that the change is possible in a way that it hasn't been perhaps in a generation, and it might not come again in a generation.
I said at one point in the chapter that universities have become like congressional candidates. They're expected to have an opinion about everything. I was living in a university where a very fine dean at my law school developed the habit of sending these missives telling everyone what the school thinks. And since it was never what I thought, I began to feel that I had been told that I was the heretic who should stand in the corner. He never told me to shut up. He never told me not to say anything, but nevertheless, he kept telling everyone that the institution thought the opposite of what I thought. Universities should speak about those things. They have to, because they're doing things, and so they have to be able to justify themselves. But they should do that with an affirmative effort to repeat and repeat that dissent is welcome in their communities.
The biggest problem facing free thought and inquiry is not censorship, but censure and closure. It's a social problem, people worried about being canceled on campus, no one eating lunch with them, being shot down on social media, being harassed in various ways by bureaucrats and so forth. The second point that I make in the article is that free speech is necessary but not sufficient. And if we think of what we're talking about simply as free speech, we fail to understand the nature of what it is that we are trying to defend at universities. I call that the constitution of knowledge, by which I mean a whole system of rules, norms, and institutions that channel debate and inquiry in constructive directions. And that's very, very hard to do.
My former student, Nate Honeycutt, who actually works for FIRE, is a research scientist there, for his dissertation did 2 national surveys. 40% of the faculty self-identified. It's not us imposing something on them. I chose for themselves, when asked about what their political views are, that they were radicals, activists, Marxists, or socialists. Not Democrats. That's a whole nother issue. They're not liberals. 40%. It was almost 60% for the graduate students. Radicals, activists, socialists, and Marxists. These are the future faculty, right? That's where the faculty are coming from. So when you have such, it's not just left. I mean, the skew of academia now is extreme left in 2 senses. The skew is extremely left, and the prevalence of people on the far left is also extreme. Academia is, for the most part, a social reputational system. How do you succeed? People say you're smart. How do you get published? People say your paper is good. How do you get a grant? People say your proposal is good. So if your reputation is blackened, it can damage your entire career. People know this and they shut up.
So what is to be done? The book proposes many, many reforms. One is just in both K-12 and higher education. We have to teach students the importance of the First Amendment. We have to re-establish free speech, free inquiry, freedom of religion as key parts of of what America is, as key American values that should unite people across party lines, across religious lines, across, whether you're traditional or more non-traditional, sexually or otherwise. Second, we need to sponsor debates to get students and their professors habituated to rather than triggered by alternative views. Third, inevitably, by their very nature, and I say this as, I've worked for the federal government, I don't hate bureaucracy, I don't hate government, but bureaucracies, by their very nature, promote conformity over freedom. It's what they do. So for that reason, we must downsize DEI bureaucracies, sure, but we must downsize a lot of bureaucracies that limit speech. Inevitably, if there's a huge administrative superstructure in universities, it will limit our freedom. It just will.
So technically I'm on vacation. I was supposed to leave this morning, but then I remembered we had this dinner. So I would not be here right now. But I wanted to do this because I consider this issue so important. But one of the things that's kind of difficult for FIRE is that, we were founded in 1999. I joined in 2001. We have probably done more than any other institution to point out how far universities have fallen from really respecting, and I think honestly in some cases even really understanding, academic freedom and freedom of inquiry. I've written 4 books, I guess, about the problems in academia. And the most depressing one that I wrote, honestly, was the most recent one, Canceling of the American Mind, which is coming out in paperback at the end of April. And the process of writing that just depressed the hell out of me, because even though I've been doing this for going to be 24 years on October 2nd, I didn't actually realize how desperate and bad the whole thing looked in terms of to the level where I think that essentially if you look at something, an issue being debated in academia, and you see kind of like an institutional position, or you see a popular position among experts, that you shouldn't trust it unless it actually goes against kind of the popular, kind of more left-leaning narrative. Because essentially there's so much pressure, there are so many different reasons. I call this the conformity gauntlet in Canceling of the American Mind, that essentially there are so many different ways in which there's pressure on you to go in that direction. It's insane to think that you can actually trust conclusions with any political valence whatsoever in the current environment to actually be anything like objective. If they happen to be true, it's probably more of a coincidence that they are true. And this is a terrifying situation to be in for someone who cares about the production of knowledge, for knowledge we can actually care about. And this is what I meant when I said previously that despite all the threats from the right that FIRE has fought consistently, the threat from the left is one that worries the hell out of me, partially because when you have entirely left-dominated spaces, they don't even see the idea that there aren't arguments that they're bringing to the table in the first place. And that destroys the reliability of knowledge, which is one of the reasons why faith in higher ed, but also faith in experts, has absolutely plummeted. Particularly when you see a situation in which, I always give the Carol Hooven as an example, but we literally can cite thousands of these, where you have a situation in which, someone actually goes on Fox News and says biological sex is real, even though she says it in a very compassionate way. She's an accurate way. And she gets, a cancel campaign against her at Harvard. Just that one incident means they're never going to trust you again. And probably not just on this. They're probably not going to trust you again on anything. And that's if it only happens once. When it happens over and over and over again, you have an epistemic crisis. So I'm very worried about the state of higher education. Also, to sound like a Marxist, it replicates class privilege in a ferocious way. I learned this as a poor kid who went to Stanford, and I think it's one of the reasons why they don't like people like me and J.D. Vance going to these schools, is we go and holy, this is insane. This just makes more rich people. And then they let a couple plumbers through and they're kind of like, yay, we did our job. So I came in with such concern about the state of higher education on every possible level. But then the Trump administration comes in, and I was explaining this, like to, I was about to say my friends who were inclined to vote for Trump. I didn't really have friends who were inclined to vote for Trump, to be honest. That essentially I'm like, yeah, he's going to make wokeness worse. Because he's going to come in, he's going to overplay his hand. It's going to be, and it's going to bring this entire ideology back with a vengeance. So I still think that's a possibility. But even outside of that, right now, some of the stuff that he is demanding of Harvard, I don't like Harvard at all. I like Harvard only slightly more than I like Columbia. And that's not a good place to be. They finished dead last. Harvard finished dead last on our campus free speech ranking, which is it may be, it may have its flaws, but it's ultimately the most rigorous attempt to actually quantify what free speech is like on college campuses that's ever been done. But he's telling them, who they should hire, who they should admit, how they should change their adjudicatory function, all kind of things that this is essentially nationalizing Harvard. So we can't stand for that either. Now, of course, is there a world in which they could have actually gone through the findings of both violations of Title IX due to affirmative action, or Title VI due to the mistreatment of Jewish students? Yeah, I think there was a good chance they were going to lose on all of those. And Title VI, as Adam, my co-author, reminded me, under Title VI, you can't actually get all federal funding. On Title IX, and also weirdly FERPA, you can potentially have all federal funding removed. And once you have that kind of power over higher ed, which they've had for decades now, you are put in a position of being able to dictate terms, almost like a plea bargain to universities. But what they're actually asking wildly exceeds the power of what government we would like to think should actually be. So right now, FIRE is making, as always, the principled argument that no, this is not okay. And of course, everyone's coming back with all the sins of Harvard. But as civil libertarians, we have to be the last ones giving up on the idea that procedures matter, process matters. So I will say, in my heartwarming conclusion to my remarks, as I was listening to you guys discuss the potential changes and reforms that could potentially happen in higher ed, I got even more depressed. So good night.